A scenario I see as a sports psychologist at least on a weekly basis. Two athletes who are equally competitive, yet they define success completely differently. In sports psychology, we call this an ego orientation versus a mastery orientation. This is different than intrinsic and extrinsic motivation, although it does play a role. Of course it does. An ego-oriented athlete is looking outside of oneself and constantly in comparison with others. How are the others doing in comparison to me? How am I doing in comparison to the others? Am I better than everyone else? Am I measuring up? An ego-oriented athlete's focus is entirely on winning, placement, points, ranking higher, looking talented, being better than other people, winning not for oneself to prove that one is doing well, but rather to beat everybody else. Or simply, for example, that it looks easier than what everybody else is doing when I do it. It looks better. It looks cleaner. I look more talented. I look more natural. The most intense example of this I've ever met in my life was a coach who had 12 teams. And this coach specifically said their motivation for going to a ton of championships with all 12 teams and for continually coaching all 12 teams was to beat everybody else. Not to get better, not to have a good time, not to enjoy coaching, not to invest in their athletes, but to beat everybody else. And that was the whole point. On the other side of that is a mastery orientation. This athlete is asking themselves, am I getting better? Am I seeing progress in myself? Success to them means learning, growing, improving, getting cleaner, doing skills that I couldn't do 6 months ago. Intrinsic and extrinsic motivation, two things on a spectrum with each other. They are forms of motivation. They're just on a spectrum with intrinsic on one side and then many forms of extrinsic motivation on the other side, leading away from our intrinsic motivation on one side. Motivation asks, why am I doing this? But orientation asks us to ask, how am I deciding whether or not I'm good at this? How am I measuring myself? If your reference point is other athletes, their social media posts, their rankings, their videos, their selections, their praise, their qualifications, their fame, your brain learns to scan outwards for evidence of competition and bases how good you are and how good your experience was on what everybody else is doing, something that you have absolutely no control over whatsoever. You're leaving your competence and your confidence up to everybody else. Why? To shift then into mastery, you have to reorient that into yourself. The reference point is always you. So how do you know which one you are? So think back to a bad competition or one where the result was not something that you wanted, where you were incredibly frustrated, or maybe you were very disappointed. When you get into it in your mind, if your first thought is, everybody saw me doing terribly, that was so embarrassing, it was awful that everybody saw me looking like that. How could I have done that to myself? Yes, shame can belong to ego and to mastery, but most likely you are in ego there because you are focused on what everybody else is thinking about you and how they see you. The ego says you are not good enough, or you're very, very good and gets arrogant and cocky. But oftentimes it's also the other side of the ego is saying you're not good enough. You'll never measure up. Now, on the other hand, on the mastery side, and this can still have embarrassment woven into it, the question is a lot more, what happened and what do I need to do to improve that so that doesn't happen again? That's mastery, because at the end of the day, you cannot control at all if somebody else is better than you. It's just not possible. The comparison game never helps. So if your confidence depends entirely on something you can't control, on a comparison game that you have no control over and is also very volatile, sport gets threatening really, really quickly because it's constantly threatening your ego. You're always going to be under threat. Your ego is always going to be in danger because there's so much about it that you can't control. Literally nothing, and you don't have the knowledge, so you're losing safety because you've placed your safety in this comparison game. But mastery gives you somewhere to go when you lose. You go back to the drawing board, you go back in the gym, you go back to your journal. You can go back home and rest, knowing that you are taking steps to get better because you see all your progress in the last 6 months, in the last year, in the last 10 years. And you know that that's not going to be negated just because of one bad competition or a difficult performance or many mistakes or a lack of confidence, because things change. You will get better. That's something you can control. And it's about your experience and not you compared to everybody else. You can still want to win, and you should, regardless of what orientation you have. But winning is the outcome. Getting better is the job. In order to start shifting back into mastery, using yourself as a reference point, we have to consistently set yourself as the reference point. So before each training session, go ahead and write down one concrete thing that you're trying to work on, whether that's a skill, better execution, better decision making, more focus, more consistency, cleaner, whatever matters today. Set an appropriate goal for that. And during training, you're going to use that as the reference. So continue to compare yourself to that goal, measuring yourself based on that goal that you set at the beginning of the training session, not the athlete next to you, not the athlete behind you, not the video analysis from last week, and definitely not your best video ever that you've ever seen, and definitely not the best Instagram photo that your competitor posted this morning. Nobody cares about that. We care about you. We're here for you. And the question is never, was that good? No, we don't care about that. The question is, was that better? Have I made progress? What did I learn? And what's my next adjustment? What's my next move in order to learn something? Do I need to ask my coach for help? Do I need to ask my stunt partner for help? Do I need to go back to the drawing board and understand this skill better? Do I need to just keep getting the reps in? What do I need to do in order to continue to improve this point? It sounds super simple, but you are training your attention to base it on yourself and not on everybody else. It takes a long time because comparison is natural, especially if you're somebody who feels a lot of shame, potentially could be difficult, could be a little embarrassing, but we need to get interior here. We have to stop using other people as your scoreboard of confidence and start using yourself. Let them just be information and let your actual reference point that you care the most about be, am I becoming a better athlete? Every time you evaluate yourself against yourself, whether that's your own performance previously, your own performance now, your expectation of yourself, your development, your controllable actions, your recovery, you're reinforcing a definition of yourself that is centered on yourself. And that's so important. We're taking the power away from everybody else and putting it back into you. That does a lot for your confidence along the way too. A little secondary, however, it does work. Again, you can still care about winning, but winning is the outcome. The real work is getting better.